Good morning and welcome to Nature Live from the Natural History Museum. My name's Khalil Thurlaway and I'll be your host this morning. Now that we can't share our science with you in person, we want to bring it to you wherever you are. And we thought we'd do our first show on what the Natural History Museum is probably best known for, and that's dinosaurs. With me, I have Paul Barrett, one of our paleontologists here at the museum, and we're here to answer any and all questions you might have about dinosaurs. So please do get involved in the comment section and we'll try and answer as many as we can. If you feel like your question is silly or obvious, don't worry. There are probably a load of other people out there wondering the same thing. So please do stick it in the comment section. And like I said, we'll try and answer as many as possible in the time we have. Your question's probably even more interesting than you think it is. I've also got a couple of questions myself, so we'll sprinkle a couple of those in along the way. So without further ado, let's introduce Paul. Hi, Paul.
Hi, morning, Khalil. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm really looking forward to chatting about dinosaurs. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. So let's first clear something up. What are dinosaurs? This may seem like an obvious question, but
I think it's actually a really good question because lots of people think lots of other extinct animals are dinosaurs, which aren't. And there are lots of mistakes out there about the kinds of animals that people call dinosaurs. But they're a very specific group of animals. They're a group of animals that are reptiles and related to other reptiles like crocodiles and lizards and snakes. And they are characterized as a group by a number of features, rather surprisingly, of their hips and their legs. We generally think of dinosaurs as gigantic animals, but actually they weren't all giants. Some of them were very, very tiny, in fact. But what they did all share in common was that they modified their legs to stick under their body, like owls do, actually. So they work like pillars rather than sticking out to the sides like they do in crocodiles and lizards.
So on this image we have here, there's an imposter hiding in plain sight. So
there is.
I don't know if you guys at home can point it out. So think about which of these creatures isn't actually a dinosaur. Point at it on the screen. And now Paul's going to give us the big reveal.
Yeah, so there is one imposter in this. It's just disappeared from your screens right now. And that's an animal called a pterosaur, or a flying reptile. And pterosaurs look a bit like dinosaurs, and they were quite closely related to them, but they weren't dinosaurs. They were a distinct group of reptiles that lived at the same time and flew through the skies at the same time that dinosaurs were roaming around on the ground. So close, but not a dinosaur.
So your work at the museum studying dinosaurs as a paleontologist, what does that involve? What do you do?
So on a day-to-day basis, I do lots of different things. I spend time working through our collections of dinosaurs, trying to find new things out about them, whether that's how many different types of dinosaur there were, how those dinosaurs behaved, what their biology was like. I also go and look at dinosaurs in other museums to compare them with ours and other dinosaur specimens from around the world. And sometimes I even get to go out in the field and dig up new dinosaurs from time to time.
I must say that is a very fetching fieldwork outfit. Really,
it's a nice hat.
Georgie angle of the hat. Yeah. So we've got
and very smelly at the time, which you can't get from the photograph, actually.
I think we're lucky it's not like a multi-sensory photograph. So we've got a first question from the audience, and we've been asked, which dinosaur species do we have the most evidence for in the collection? So I'm guessing that's like, how many specimens we have or how big or how high quality those specimens are.
That's a really great question. So our collection has dinosaurs from all over the world, from every continent. So we're really lucky, and also from every time period that the non-bird dinosaurs were alive. So we do very well with lots of different kinds, but the one that we probably have the most material of, I would say it's 50-50. It's either an animal called Mantellisaurus, which used to be called Iguanodon, or it's one of those other very Iguanodon-like animals. We have really big collections of Iguanodon-like animals down in our basement stores. And this is because it was a very common dinosaur. There are lots and lots of them around. And also it's a dinosaur that lived in the UK, and most of our collection is of dinosaurs that were found in the UK, which is why we have so many of them.
So for those of you at home, Iguanodon was the one that was always giving the thumbs up, right?
Exactly. So it's like the kind of Fonzie dinosaur that's always got a thumb stuck up. Its thumbs have spikes instead of fingers. And those spikes might have been used for defense, maybe for warding off attacks from meat-eating dinosaurs, because Iguanodon and its relatives were herbivores.
I mean, yeah, I guess it helps to be able to defend yourself like that. So if we've got these fossils and specimens of dinosaurs that give us a certain amount of information, because they are the bones of these dinosaurs, how do we know what they look like on the outside?
In most cases, we just have the bones. So then we have to use clues from living animals to work out what the appearance of those animals would have been like when they were alive. And we do that by getting into the anatomy of those living animals in a big way. So we work out how their muscles attach to their bones and look for the same clues on the bones of the dinosaurs to see how the muscles would have been arranged around their skeletons. That kind of gives us an outline of the animal. Then we know that we have to clothe that in skin. And sometimes we're lucky and we get fossils of the skin. And sometimes those fossils show that the animals were covered in scales. And other times they show that those animals actually had coverings of feathers. So that gives us the next big clue as to the appearance. And then the final bit would be thinking about the color of those animals. And that's something that very recent work has started to offer some clues on. We're just starting to learn something about the original colors that dinosaurs might have been. So building up all those layers really depends on having a good knowledge of living animals that were related to dinosaurs and using that knowledge to then build up those missing parts of the animals that aren't left behind in the fossils.
How can we, you mentioned color, how can we work out the color of something that's just a fossilized remain in the rock?
So it's been very, very difficult. And when I used to give talks on dinosaurs, even 5 or 10 years ago, I used to say we will never know the color of a dinosaur. It's the kind of thing that you would expect the information would all just be lost over the vast amount of time that the fossils are in the ground. But some work by colleagues around the world has been looking at incredible detail, in particular at the feathered dinosaurs, looking at them with high-powered electron microscopes to see down into the fine structure of those feathers. And in some cases, they've actually found evidence of what look like pigment cells. And those pigment cells, their shapes and their sizes can give some clues onto the types of colors that they would have represented, which are mainly things like browns and russets and blacks and stuff like that. So there's some idea that some of these dinosaurs may have had kind of either gingerish plumes to them or been shiny black. And we might even find out other more interesting colors as we get further and deeper into those types of evidence.
I guess it goes to show, never say never. You know?
No, absolutely. So yeah, it was a nice one for me. I had to eat my hat on those ones.
Your jaunty angled hat. So from extrapolating this, from developing these models of the dinosaurs from the fossils, can we then work out what they behaved like?
We can try. And again, it comes down to comparing with living animals. So we have our bones. We can rearrange those in skeletons by comparing with living animals and by just working out the most likely way that those bones fit together. We then add muscles, and that starts to give us some limits on what the animals could do. Like it could tell us if they could hop or run or jump, move quickly, or if they were confined to moving slowly. And then we can combine that information with other clues, things like footprints that give us ideas about how quickly those animals were moving, how long their stride lengths were. We can combine it with other information on diets to decide if this was a large, slow-moving herbivore or a carnivore, those kinds of things. So we use lots of different lines of evidence from the skeleton and then from looking at those same features in living animals to work out what the behavior might have been like.
So while we're talking about recreating dinosaurs virtually, we've got a question from one of our viewers. It's asking, what dinosaur would you most like to see recreated? And I'm assuming this is in a kind of real living Jurassic Park sense rather than a virtual sense.
Yeah, actually, for me, well, I work mainly on plant-eating dinosaurs. I think the meat-eating dinosaur,
to recreate a plant-eating dinosaur.
It's almost certainly the more sensible way to go because they might be quite big and quite bad-tempered, a bit like a rhinoceros, but equally not that interested in eating you, which I think is probably a key feature to go with. So I would go for a plant eater. Yeah, I think I'd go for a little plant eater, partly because they're cute. I think the little plant eaters are quite cute. So I would quite like to see an animal a bit like a Hypsilophodon, which is a little tiny, sort of 2 meter long, 2-legged plant-eating dinosaur from the UK, which looks a little bit like the dinosaur equivalent of a small deer. I think that'd be quite cute, running around the back garden.
You can just imagine Richmond Park, instead of being full of deer, is full of Hypsilophodon.
That would be actually really quite cool. I quite like that.
Please keep dogs on a leash. Dinosaurs gravy. What dinosaur would you be most worried about someone bringing back if they did bring it back?
Again, it would have to be a meat eater, obviously, because meat eaters would probably want to eat you. And as a result of that, I think that I would probably not want to see some of the smaller, smarter meat eaters reconstructed. Things like T-Rexes and so on, you'd probably see them coming from a way off or hear them coming. So you might have a bit of a chance to get out of their way. But I'm pretty sure that some of the smaller, nastier things like Velociraptor would be harder to avoid. And if there are a bunch of them after you, I think it would actually be quite nasty. So that is something I would not like to bump into.
Yeah, I guess with a big one, at least, yeah, it's easier to hear and see them coming. You see the ripples in the glass of water.
They're not that big. That is one of the big Jurassic Park fallacies, that T-Rex is not so heavy it would cause earthquakes. It's a nice thing. It's a nice thing in the movie, but it would not have happened.
So while we're talking about the differences between kind of meat eaters and plant eaters, how do we, know which ones were meat eaters and which ones were plant eaters?
We do that by looking at their heads and thinking about their skulls and their teeth in the first place, because that's the bit of the business end of the animal as far as feeding is concerned, and the bit that actually has to grab the food and pass it down into the rest of the body. So the shape of the teeth gives us lots of clues on whether an animal was eating meat, in which case it has teeth that are generally curved and sharp with lots of little sharp serrations like a knife around the edge for slicing through meat and grabbing meat. Or they might be teeth that are broader or that have wear on them, where they've been grinding together to turn plant food into mush before they swallow it. So paleontologists that work on feeding are obsessed with heads and obsessed with teeth. They spend their whole time thinking about how those teeth might have worked, how the jaws might have worked, how they would have been powered by the muscles making those jaws move up and down. And those give us the first clues into the diet of the animal.
So while we're talking about kind of big meat-eating dinosaurs, we've got a question from one of our viewers asking, how big were T-Rex's actual teeth?
So T-Rex teeth are actually really impressive. And this is coming from someone who doesn't like T-Rex very much, because T-Rex ate all the animals I thought were more interesting. But T-Rex teeth are genuinely impressive. A big T-Rex tooth, which includes the biting bit of the tooth that would have stuck above the gum, and the bit of the tooth that's embedded in the jaw to keep it strong and fixed in place, up to about 30 centimeters long in a really big T-Rex from tip to the bottom. These are large, impressive sized objects.
That's a big tooth. And how many of them would it have about?
A T-Rex has something like about 70 teeth in its mouth at any one time that are actually working. So it's a serious mouth.
Yeah, I mean, if your day-to-day life is going around killing and eating other animals, you've got to have a lot of big, sharp, strong teeth. We've got another T-Rex related question as well. Seems to be a very popular dino today. Sam would like to know, if a T-Rex got up, how would it? So if a T-Rex fell over, how would it get up? I mean, it's only got little arms, so would it just kind of?
It's true. So it couldn't use its arms. If we fall over, we just instantly put our hands out and try and push ourselves up. Now, T-Rex had tiny arms, and its arms couldn't even reach its mouth. They were completely useless in terms of grappling with other dinosaurs, or in terms of actually pushing against the ground, or even in terms of catching its food. So it wouldn't have been able to use those. I suspect it would have had to do what a lot of birds do when they fall over. So a lot of birds, they use their wings, which helps them a bit. But there are some birds, things like ostriches and kiwis, that don't have very big wings and spend their time running around on the ground most of the time. And occasionally they do trip over and fall over. And when that happens, they get up in a very undignified way. They basically have to use their legs to scrabble under their bodies. They kind of wiggle around a bit. They use their head and their neck to try and help push up against the floor. And eventually they get going again, just by kicking their feet as hard as they can backwards against the floor. And I suspect T-Rex would have been doing something very similar.
It's not a very dignified look for the king of the dinosaurs.
Not really, no. It has to be said. But I can't think of any other way that it would manage to do that.
So you mentioned birds there. what's the connection between birds and dinosaurs?
So it was suggested a long, long time ago, actually, that birds and dinosaurs might be very closely related, but it's an idea that went out of fashion for nearly 100 years. But the last few years have seen this idea becoming really the best idea for explaining where birds come from, because birds and dinosaurs have skeletons that share lots and lots of features that aren't seen in any other animal groups, either living or dead. And it seems very, very likely that birds are nothing more than a specialized group of feathered, flying, usually flying, dinosaurs.
Well, this cassowary in this image here, in that previous image, is one of my favorite examples of this. I mean, who can say that that's not just a velociraptor in a fancy coat?
Well, absolutely. It's exactly what's going on. I mean, if you just look at it, it has a very dinosaur-like pose with that nice long curved neck, very long legs, and it's walking on two legs only, which is a very dinosaur-like thing to do that we don't see in many other groups of animals, with the exception of ourselves and a couple of other rare times that animals have gone up to become two-legged animals only. And obviously, it's also covered in feathers, like we know some dinosaurs were too.
And so what's this reconstruction here?
So this is a little tiny dinosaur from China called Microraptor. And this is one of the first dinosaurs that we knew about that had a definite coating of feathers, that was a dinosaur that was not yet a bird. So this is a small meat-eating dinosaur. It's fairly close to the origin of birds, but not that close. It's a little bit further away. But we know from its fossils that its whole body is covered with this fine downy fuzz, and that some parts of its body also have these much more complicated, more bird-like feathers.
And it's interesting, its name, Microraptor, because micro obviously meaning small, and raptor is a word we use to describe birds of prey, like eagles and hawks, right?
Exactly. So we use the word raptor because actually originally it means, the original meaning of raptor is thief or plunderer, and lots of meat-eating animals and meat-eating birds are called raptors because they're thought to be kind of plundering and stealing meat from carcasses. It's a nice grisly name for these things. And in this case, micro is because it's tiny. Microraptor is one of the smallest non-bird dinosaurs we know about. Skeletons of this animal are only about 30 centimeters long from the tip of its nose to the base of its tail. So these would have also, for meat-eating dinosaurs, are actually quite cute.
And so this entire dinosaur, Microraptor, would have been about the same size as a single T-Rex tooth.
Not much bigger, yeah. When you add on, it would have had a long tail as well, but the length of its body, not much bigger than a T-Rex tooth. These are genuinely small animals.
Look, again, sticking to T-Rex, we've got another question about T-Rex from our audience. Amelia's asking, why did T-Rex have such small arms?
That's a great question.
An inconvenient thing to have.
It is. No one knows, is the honest answer. So those really small arms are not only unusual because they're so tiny, but they're also unusual because T-Rex only has 2 fingers on each hand. It's got rid of all of its other fingers. So it's actually using its hands for we don't know what. It could be that they are what we call in evolution a vestigial structure. That is a structure that used to be useful, that is gradually stopped being used and is on its way to being completely lost. So it could be that T-Rex ancestors used their arms for something, they stopped doing that. As a result, the arms got progressively smaller during the evolution of the group. And if T-Rex was allowed to evolve a bit longer, maybe it would lose its arms altogether. So we can't think of any really good reasons why T-Rex kept its arms. They're still quite strong though, because when we look at them, they have big muscles still attaching to them that would have meant they were quite strong. But definitely not for feeding, because they're so short that its mouth would get to whatever it was fighting or eating before its arms would. Definitely not for getting up, because they just can't reach the ground at all. And so we just don't know. One possibility is that they're used for very, very up close and personal encounters with other T-Rexes. But that's about the best that we can come up with.
I mean, we know they weren't brushing their teeth.
Definitely not. They would have probably had quite unpleasant breath, actually.
So we've had another question. This one not about T-Rex for once. Well done. So Corey is asking, do we know if dinosaurs were social animals like you see in the films, specifically like velociraptors?
We do know about some dinosaurs from that point of view, and it's been suggested that things like Velociraptor were social, and that's because occasionally we find the remains of several different velociraptors together, or velociraptor-like animals together at kill sites. So we find the skeleton of a herbivorous dinosaur that's been partly eaten, and we find teeth around it of different sizes and different shapes that suggest that different but related animals were all there at the same time feeding on it, which is one of the reasons that that's been suggested. We've also found a few footprints together, which suggests that they might have moved around together in packs. And also these were smart dinosaurs. They had quite big brains for dinosaurs. And that is also something we'd expect you'd need if you're a sociable animal. So that's there are a few lines of evidence that all come together to suggest they might have lived in packs.
So for those velociraptors to be all fossilized together at that kill site, does that mean that they were all eating that one herbivore and then they all died at the same time?
No, so we don't have their whole skeletons. What we have are their teeth. So when these meat eaters are feeding on these big dinosaurs, because big dinosaurs have thick skin and they have tough bones, some of those teeth would occasionally break and they get left behind. So we don't have the skeletons of them there. What we do have are teeth scattered around the skeleton that were left behind by those animals as they were chowing down.
So on the subject of velociraptors being particularly smart for dinosaurs, how much do we know about dinosaur intelligence and how do we deduce that?
So we do that by looking inside the skulls to see what the space that's left within the skull by the brain. And we can work out from that how big the brain was. We then compare the size of the brain with the overall size of the animal. And by coming up with that comparison, we can compare with living animals, for which we've also done that, to work out maybe how smart they were. So, for example, when we do that, humans come out as pretty smart because our brains are much bigger than you'd expect for an animal of our size. Whereas things like sheep come out as fairly dumb because they have brains that are a bit smaller than you'd expect them to be for an animal of its size. And we can do exactly the same kind of comparisons among dinosaurs. And what we find is that some of the small meat eaters had brains that are a bit bigger than we would expect for their body size, whereas some of the big plant eaters had brains that were much, much, much smaller. And so it's a rough guide, but it does... Sorry, Khalil?
Oh, no.
It's a rough guide, but it does tell us something about the different kind of brain sizes and maybe the intelligence of those animals.
Because one of the big examples that's often used for that is Stegosaurus, this really big plant-eating dinosaur, but its brain was, what, about that big?
Yeah, so the brain of Stegosaurus always says, if you read very old books, it tells you it's the size of a walnut, and that's actually not true. It's the size of about 2 walnuts. Or the size of a size of a satsuma, something like that, or a small orange, small apple. So pretty small for an animal that can weigh up to about 4 tons in weight and become up to about 9 meters long. But saying that, the record holders for the smallest brains relative to their body sizes have got to be the gigantic sauropods. These are animals that might have a skull that's maybe 50 or 60 centimeters long, but might weigh 30 or 40 tons. So these are animals that have particularly small brains in comparison with their body size. But as humans, we often get caught up on the idea of intelligence being important. And it's actually not all that important in the history of life. If you're an animal, you just need to be able to find food, evade predators, and find other animals of your same type to make other little baby animals. And if you can do all of those 3 things, you're doing actually really well. Whereas you could argue that in other respects, intelligence is an advantage because it allows us to live in places we wouldn't normally live and solve lots of different problems. But it also takes a lot of energy to keep these brains working. It takes a lot of energy, so you're always having to fuel that brain, which is a big disadvantage. So there are pros and cons of being intelligent or not intelligent in the animal world.
So there are different kind of strategies that organisms can use to address kind of similar problems. And we've got another question about that kind of thing. Andrew has asked, did dinosaurs lay eggs or give birth to live young? Because, reptiles today mostly lay eggs, but some give birth to live young.
No, that's right. Among living reptiles, most lay eggs, but there are quite a few lizards that give birth to live young, for example. But in dinosaurs, as far as we know, all of them laid eggs, which is something that we also see, obviously, in their living descendants, the birds. And we know that because we have lots of dinosaur eggs in the fossil record, some of which also have embryos in them, which mean that we can identify exactly which species laid those eggs, and we have nests. And all of those things together, and the fact that all dinosaur relatives that are alive today lay eggs, suggests that all dinosaurs were egg layers.
And you mentioned nests. So what were these nests like?
The eggs nests were varied from dinosaur to dinosaur. So in the very big sauropod dinosaurs, they look like they're fairly simple structures where they basically scoop out a hollow in the ground and lay their eggs within that hollow in the ground. Whereas in some others, things like, for example, the duck-billed dinosaurs, like Maiasaura, also, which is called that because the name means good mother lizard, it built mound-like nests where it would build almost like a little mud volcano. And in the top of that mud volcano, it would make a dent and it would lay the eggs within that dent. So there are lots of different types. And obviously, birds are dinosaurs too, and they have lots of different nest types that they build out of twigs and mud and feathers and all sorts of things.
So they, as birds have evolved, they've kind of, their behaviors have, I guess, got more complex and their nests have got more varied.
It's not just that their behaviors have changed, but also they live in different places. They live at the tops of trees and they're small, which opens up things like living in holes and all those kinds of things that if you're a multi-ton triceratops is a lot harder to do.
So we've had a question from Kyra asking, what's the most modern species of dinosaur we know of? And I think, obviously we've talked about how birds are the modern descendants of dinosaurs. So I guess this question is about kind of some of the kind of the later species of dinosaur that were nearer the extinction event.
Sure. So other than living birds, and there were lots of birds alive at the time that the other dinosaurs were alive too. So it's not just birds today, but birds were flying through the air at the same time that their other dinosaur relatives were roaming around on the ground. So there are quite a few of those animals, including, for example, the very early ancestors of ducks and chickens would have been alive at the same time that T-Rex and Triceratops were alive. And other than that, the very last dinosaurs are things like those classic dinosaurs, T-Rex, Triceratops, Edmontosaurus, that were living in these ecosystems that were still there at the time that the asteroid came along and spoiled all the fun.
That has really made my day, thinking about ducks and chickens hanging out with T-Rex and Triceratops. That has just made my day. Thank you. Thanks, Cairo, for that question. So I think we're almost coming towards the end of the time that we've got this morning. I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. So keep those questions coming in and we'll pick out a couple of them to answer. But I had a question which kind of relates to something you were talking about earlier, about how a lot of the specimens in the Natural History Museum's collection are from dinosaurs that lived in the UK, because they were fossils that were collected in the UK. So what was the dinosaur ecosystem like in what is now the UK? Obviously, it may not have looked the same geographically as well.
Well, dinosaurs were around a long time, and obviously the UK's environment changed a lot during that time too, when different types of dinosaurs were around. But for most of the time, a lot of the UK didn't look like it looks now. Parts of it were underwater. Often it was quite a bit warmer than it is today, with more like, so some of the time the environment was much more like the Bahamas, with shallow islands, shallow seas scattered with islands with dinosaurs living with them. Other times it was a bit warmer, with big rivers flowing over what's now Kent and Surrey and the Isle of Wight, with big forests of conifer trees all around them, and animals like this one, Baryonyx, actually stomping through them. So the UK has an unusual position in dinosaur history, actually, because although we're a very small island and the areas of rocks where dinosaurs are found are fairly small in comparison to, say, the US or China or Argentina, we have a lot of fossils from those rocks, which give us a very good idea of the very rich dinosaurs that were around. Surprising to a lot of people that there were a lot of dinosaurs in the UK.
So this one we've got, so we were talking about Mantellosaurus earlier, and this one we've got on the, well, we had on the screen just now. That's another British dinosaur, right?
It is. This is a dinosaur called Baryonyx, and Baryonyx is a meat-eating dinosaur. In fact, it ate fish. It's one of the very few dinosaurs we know definitely ate fish, with that very long, almost crocodile-like skull. And it's a relative of a much more famous dinosaur from the Jurassic Park movies, an animal called Spinosaurus. If you imagine putting a sail on the back of Baryonyx, that's really the only big difference from it and a Spinosaurus.
Well, you can always improve a dinosaur by putting a sail on the back. I think it just makes it look a bit, a bit sportier. So one of our viewers, Will, would like to know, what are the best places in the UK to find dinosaur fossils?
So you need to go to the places in the UK with rocks of the right age and rocks of the right type, and those are rocks that were laid down in the Triassic, Jurassic or Cretaceous period, and preferably in or on the land. Luckily, there are lots of places in the UK where those types of rocks can be found. So possibly the best place in the UK for dinosaurs is actually the Isle of Wight, because you can go along the beaches there, and the rocks that make up the cliffs behind those beaches have dinosaur bones in them that occasionally get worn out by the sea lapping against those cliffs. But there are other places too. So the Yorkshire coast also has lots of dinosaur footprints. The Jurassic coast in Dorset also comes up with dinosaur fossils and dinosaur footprints. And there are a few places scattered around through all of southern England, basically, that will have some chance. If you have a local quarry or some local area where the rocks are at the surface, you might stand a chance of finding dinosaur bones or other fossils.
So those inland areas sound really, really nice. But I mean, spending a day by the seaside looking for dinosaur bones and footprints sounds pretty amazing. Once we're all allowed outside again, obviously, stay safe and stay distant.
It's much easier at the seaside because the sea is constantly cutting those rocks backwards, and new things are coming out all the time. It is doing the digging for you. And not only that, though, you have to be careful when you're doing this. Cliffs are dangerous places to hang out to look for fossils because they fall all the time. So it's good to look on the beach, but stay away from the cliffs themselves, because those bones do come out. They roll around on the beach to be found. So look on the beach rather than climbing up and down the cliffs.
Great. I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. That brings us to the end of the time we've got for today's session. I'm really sorry if we didn't have time to answer your particular question at home. Thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed myself. I hope you'll all join me in thanking Paul, although I have a feeling that he quite enjoyed spending the morning chatting about dinosaurs. But thank you so much, Paul.
No, a great pleasure. Thanks very much.
Well, there are more Nature Live talks to look forward to on Tuesdays and Fridays from now on. So check out our website and our social media pages for details of this and other online content from the Natural History Museum. Until then, goodbye and stay safe. I've been Khalil Thurlaway. That was Paul Barrett. This has been Nature Live from the Natural History Museum. Thank you.